Hey everyone, welcome back to Contractor Evolution. Today's conversation is with Garrett Moore, founder and CEO of Agorus. First, we'll talk about Garrett, then I'll tell you about Agorus. So after achieving a degree in mechanical engineering while playing quarterback at Stanford University, Garrett's passion for high-performing teams led him to a small little pocket of the military. I don't know, you maybe have heard of the Navy SEALs. He would stay there for the next 12 years, completing 3 deployments in that time, 2 in the Middle East, 1 in the Pacific. And obviously, this guy has a real thirst, a hunger for challenges. So he also felt compelled to learn Hebrew from scratch just so he could earn his master's in cybersecurity from the University of Tel Aviv. He'll say more about his story in this episode, but honestly, this guy's background is just insane. Now, when his growing family needed a larger home, he engaged a general contractor to build them one while he was overseas, which in hindsight, he admits maybe wasn't the most brilliant idea. Anyway, after a string of bad contractors and frustration, Garrett realized how antiquated and ripe for disruption much of the building process was and began to formulate, in his mind at least, what Agorus would become. Fast forward a bit, and Agorus is now a VC-backed startup straddling 3 distinct worlds: construction, manufacturing, and software. But all 3 of those are converging very quickly, as we discussed today. Their technology at Agorus allows builders to build better homes in a fraction of the time. Think of software-driven prefab without sacrificing all of the customization most clients want. Their facility in San Diego is able to manufacture custom home designs at scale and then deliver them to site for assembly in a matter of days with a fairly lean crew, rather than the traditional 4 or more months most builders are used to. Super futuristic, very fascinating. Today, we talk about the true size and scale of the housing crisis in North America and the demand for construction and trades that it is creating, which is indeed a problem, but it's actually good news for all of you listening. I also get Garrett's take on where technology, demographics, and macroeconomics are taking our industry over the next decade. And lastly, most importantly, we go deep on his team building and leadership lessons from a decade plus with the SEALs. You definitely want to stay tuned for that. It's right at the end. Now, Garrett's take on the future is pretty compelling. Some of you might wholeheartedly agree. For some of you, it might ruffle your feathers. So if you're watching this on YouTube, let us know in the comments if you agree or if you disagree with his forecast, and tell us why as well. That's it for me. Let's dive in with Garrett Moore.
You're watching Contractor Evolution, where we unpack the systems, tactics, and skills you need to take your fast-growing contracting business to the next level.
You're here to learn what it takes to scale up, work less, and increase profitability. You've come to the right place.
Stay tuned to learn what separates the new breed of contractor from the old school, and welcome to your ultimate guide on the business of contracting.
Garrett, I'm so excited to have you here. When your name crossed my desk and Agorus kind of like entered my consciousness, I was like, man, I really got to get this guy on. So I've been looking forward to this for a couple months now. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's hot. We got the fans on. It's warm here in the studio, but we're going to stay cool and we're going to have a really interesting conversation about you, the Agorus story, and potentially the future of the construction space, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in the intro, I made mention of you and Agorus. People know a little bit, but I'd say it's fairly surface level. I'd really like for people to know a bit about the Garrett story. So tell us about the path that led you here, okay?
Absolutely. It's a circuitous one and not one I would have ever thought. But now looking back, it was a great experience and a great batch of like random odd jobs and connections that all have kind of smashed together in a really unique way. So my story is grew up in Arizona. Dad's a teacher, mom's a flight attendant. Sports and school were everything. So oldest of 3 kids, got a chance to keep playing sports. Got to play football and played quarterback at Stanford. Always had a kind of an eye towards the physical world. So I got my degree in mechanical engineering. You get there very quickly though, and you realize, holy smokes, I'm an imposter. Everybody here is way smarter and way more athletic than I am.
At Stanford?
Exactly. What am I going to do with myself? I can't keep playing, but I love sports. What does this look like? And I was doing an internship, McKinsey, so consulting at the time, and I was like, man, this is not it. Like, where's the team? Where's the camaraderie? Where's the sports?
Did it feel dry
And
to you,
so,
that consulting gig?
did it still what?
Did it feel dry? Like you're saying there was something missing
Oh.
for you. It just was a little corporate, a little top down, a little white collar.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not a knock against, them or their culture, but I was, still young, wanted, a physical component, et cetera. So I took a kind of a crazy turn and said, I actually lost a good friend at the time, kind of caused me to go down a road of reflection, said, what am I doing with my life? I want to do something that matters. What about this military thing? I don't know anything about it. No military family, grew up in Arizona. Oh yeah, it's kind of sportsy for adults. So you start to pull that thread, and then you start looking, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, let's look at special operations. And then you start to go look at those. And eventually you started to meet some SEALs. And I was like, man, these guys are gods. I could never do this, but man, that's an amazing group of young men. That's the kind of person I want to become. I'll never do it, but cool, good for them. And then it just plants this insidious seed that you can't get out until eventually I was like, all right, screw it. I'm going to graduate early. I'm going to throw my name in the hat. Let's go give this a shot. And so put in an application, got picked up, went to Buds, and never looked back. It was an amazing experience. So 12 years, multiple deployments, quite a bit of time in the Middle East. During that time, I married my childhood sweetheart, had 3 kids. And by the 3rd kid, we had bought a house, and we said, just ridiculously naive, hey, let's tear it down and build a new one. Because
seems like a great idea.
A young mom with 3 small kids at home and a deployed husband in the Middle East
Needs
that's
more
the
to deal
perfect time
with.
to build a house. Dang it. Like, what was I thinking? So, of course, we did that. I went through 6 general contractors, fired them all, and eventually said, I'm just going to figure this out and do it myself. I'm tired of the lack of professionalism that I'm seeing. I'm going to do this. And so the little weird wrinkle here is I actually built it volumetrically. So a lot of the work was already being done off-site in a factory. And so I came away from that experience. I still live in the house to this day, and it's great. And now it's a huge blessing on the backside. But at the time, I came away just pissed. I was like, how is it that we are landing rockets on the open ocean on barges, and I cannot find my electrician on a Tuesday afternoon to explain why we're not pressing forward on this job? Mm-hmm. So didn't know what was wrong. I just knew that it was wrong. And essentially that's what kicked off my journey, my war path to a certain extent, to say, I'm going to get out of the military, and I'm going to do whatever I can to use technology and special operations-esque culture to solve this problem, because the need is massive. Housing is not going out of style. There's a decreasing number of workers that are coming into the workforce, and we're like 5 million homes short as a society since 2008. So this problem needs to get solved, and why not me? Let's give it a shot.
So you conceptualized this whole thing at least at a surface level. While you were still deployed, you were still in the military. This was like this construction, software, manufacturing, technology trifecta of sorts. This is an itch you decided you had to scratch before exiting the military, and so you came out of it with a bit of an idea, a bit of a plan as far as what's next for you.
Yeah, and a shameless plug. I was able to start the company and kind of subsidize some of the burn by staying on the military's dime while I was instructor duty. So it helped me get a little bit of a running start. And this is a complex problem that has a lot of legs. And so it needed some time to lay the right groundwork on people and capital and all some of the other stuff.
Yeah, so you just sort of mentioned a couple really important points that I want to dig into a little bit deeper when it comes to housing. Building homes, at least in the West. I mean, this audience, this show is sort of a North American thing. Let's look at our little slice of the planet. What's going on, or what was going on the macro level at that time that made you decide to go this route to building homes versus the more traditional one?
So I saw a few different trends going on all together, and it's kind of a caustic cocktail that just converges. So one of the things is global financial crisis, 07, 08. Everybody lived it, bottom fell out of construction. Well, the problem is, you look back historically, just look at basic population growth. American society, and I'm saying focus just on the US, but I would say this is generally similar across. American society produces the need, so population growth, equal to about 1.4 million new homes a year. Mm-hmm. Tack on top of that about 100 to 200,000 new units that need to be retrofitted. They're 1930s, 40s homes that need to get rebuilt. So our demand as a society, about 1.6 million homes. So as a frame of reference, in '08, we were building like 2 million at the time. Okay, so yeah, supply glut. All right, cool. Housing prices got a little overinflated. Well, the bottom fell out, and pretty soon you've now gone 14 years since then. That 1.6 metronome just kept going, but society was producing 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, et cetera. And so now we have built up this debt of 5.5, give or take, million homes. Now, concurrently, there's a second thing going on. As millennial and Gen Z workers are starting to come of age and we're hitting that generational boom, they're growing up with technology and smartphones in their hands. And so their interest in going into the trades, plumbing, electrical, framing, et cetera, is not like it was in previous generations. So you have an increasing demand for the product and a decreasing supply of labor that's just compounding. Well, all of this starts to come to a head in 2018, 19, 20, COVID hits. People want to work remote, and now you just threw the proverbial match into the tank of gasoline, and now it explodes, and housing prices just spike.
Right.
And even to a certain extent, housing prices are still ridiculously high, even with interest rates, because at its core, Garrett's viewpoint is that this is kind of Econ 101, supply and demand. There's a tremendous amount of demand for this product called homes, and there's a decreasing amount of supply. Therefore, people are going to pay more for this product until it catches up.
It's funny you use that language. I do a talk at a few conferences and speaking gigs when we get to go do them, called How to Hire in a Talent Shortage, and I sort of frame up this exact same set of ideas the exact same way in terms of a micro econ like literally day one of university, supply, demand. That's it, right? So it's first of all, I'm kind of validated. Okay, we're on the same page. Maybe that was a good presentation that I built, if Garrett says so. Going back to the increasing demand thing, you have obviously this COVID boom, which simultaneously brings about mass stimulus. I think the number, don't quote me on this, but it's like 9 trillion with a T in new money that's being printed and injected into the economy. So that gets the engine revved. You have nowhere to go. I mean, this has ended now, but over the last 2 years, people haven't had restaurants to go spend their hard-earned money on. They haven't had trips to go to. So a lot of people in renovations, construction have felt a boom. The phone's been ringing off the hook. You have this sort of like people upgrading as a result of COVID. Let's get out of our condo and let's get a home because we need a backyard because there's nothing else to do. Anyway, the point is, on the demand side, there's been a whole bunch of large forces that have really stimulated that sector of the economy. And at the same time, you have this decreasing supply, specifically on the labor front, on the skilled labor front. And I wonder if you maybe have just going back to that for a second, because I just think it's such an interesting and at times painful conversation to have about young people today. I ask a lot of our guests this question, like, do you have a take on this existential decline of the skilled worker? What's going on with demographics? What's going on with technology? What's going on with the tastes and preferences of young people? What's going on with the employer's ability to captivate them? What is your take on this decline of the skilled worker thing?
So I have to say, first, starting point, I'm very proud of my generation, because my generation is a little known micro generation called the Oregon Trail generation that sits right in the bridge between Gen X and millennial.
Right.
So I feel both sides. And so sometimes there's an urge to blast millennials or Gen Z, and it's just like they're out of touch, all the typical negative stereotypes, and vice versa is the same. I think it's just the raw math of, or the raw dynamics of, they're used to having so much data, and they're used to having so much choice at their fingertips on a regular basis. And they've come of age kind of in that post 9/11 era where they're looking for a cause. They're looking to be a part of something greater. And they're not seeing that in construction. So I would say, I caveat this, I'm in love with our industry. I'm in love with construction, but I'm not in love with its ways.
Right.
And so I think we as an industry have let that worker down, because we're not giving them the dotted line to a vision or a purpose that's bigger than themselves. It's just rinse, lather, repeat, try and make a buck. And that transactional nature, I think is really, really discouraging for them when they want to be a part of a movement or something bigger.
Yeah, I think that's a really good take. And I would say to our listeners, before you get your feelings hurt, we're not talking about you because you listen to the show and you follow Breakthrough Academy and you have worked on your employer brand, as we've discussed, like this whole sort of creating a mission, creating a purpose, using that as a means of communication to this younger generation and attracting them with that sort of in your pocket is a huge advantage, and it does work. And so I want to be clear, when we're talking about this, we're not talking about the high performers within construction. We're not talking about the progressive entrepreneurs that are actually ahead of the curve. We're talking about the masses. We're talking about the average. We're talking about the fly-by-nighters, which at this point still makes up a pretty large portion of the graph. Just before I really want to get into like how you guys build and the systems you use. Before we dive in, how far on the housing front, how far behind are we on this housing crisis, at least in the States? Use the statistics that you know.
Oh, it's bad. Put it into context. In order to dig out of this debt, you would need the top 100 largest builders, so your Lennars, D.R. Hortons, all the way down. Top 100 largest would have to double capacity for a decade to catch up.
Top 100 builders have to double for a decade, just to put that into perspective.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And now you have a third compounding factor that's come out in like really the last quarter, which is with all the money that's been printed and all the generational wealth that's been accumulated over the last 10 or 20 years, there's no shortage of capital. And so what we're starting to see, my inner capitalist doesn't care, but my inner American is grieved by the fact that home ownership is going to become tougher and tougher because your large, institutional money is going to start to come in and buy homes and turn around and rent them, because renting is really, really good from an investment perspective.
You're already seeing that, right? There's, I'm going to botch I read an article, like BlackRock, big money, big smart money is coming in and buying huge tranches, these massive swaths of not low income, but also not high. We're talking big apartment blocks, huge multifamily, because it's good business. And they think that it will be for many, many years to come. So I think, as a millennial who just bought a home, I'm kind of passionate about this also. I'm like that. I believe in real estate as a vehicle for wealth building, and I'd like to see more people have access to it. And I think that it's that capitalist versus American balance you're constantly trying to find. But I think we should do right by young people and not price them out of the market as quickly as we are right now.
Well, I mean, home ownership it's an American phenomenon, but we've grown up with thinking of it as a right almost. It's like the American dream. The Horatio Alger rags to riches. You have the ability to work hard, buy a home, and then the home becomes the single greatest source of wealth generation for most of us as blue collar workers.
That's right.
Well, if all of a sudden you take that tool off your tool belt, once you go down the rental route, it's really tough to get back out of it. And so if we believe that interest rates are not going back down to 2.25, and that inflation is going to be, this is a generational challenge. And then there's a great article, a recent article in The Atlantic that kind of pulls the thread on when housing is expensive, what are all the other effects? And you've got, fertility rates, and you've got obesity, and you all of a sudden pull all these different things and you realize actually housing affects a lot of other social implications, not the least of which is the one that we haven't talked about, which is sustainability and kind of carbon emissions, et cetera. So housing is not just this one isolated thing. It's a canary in the coal mine for society writ large.
It totally is. The other thing that I think is interesting when you're looking at some of these big picture numbers, and they're in the headlines every day right now, like when people talk about inflation, I think it's important. Probably a lot of you listening know this, but maybe some of you don't. And it's worth the reminder, when people talk about inflation being at 8 or 8.5% or 10, whatever the numbers are saying today, it changes week to week. That basket, that bundle we're talking eggs, bread, cheese, diapers, household stuff. That number doesn't even factor in real estate. It doesn't factor in hard assets. When we talk about inflation, it's actually significantly worse than what a lot of these numbers say, just based on the simple math equation they're using to come up with those figures. So if you didn't know that data point, it's one you can go do a little more digging on exactly how they calculate that CPI number, but it is an interesting thing to point out. Anyway, I digress. These are big, important issues. I feel really passionate about it. I think this is an important conversation. I think we understand the problem to some degree. We could bang on more about it, I'm sure, another time. Let's get into the solution. And I want you to just maybe high level, give us an overview of your guys' business systems and operations and how Agorus is attempting to fix some of this stuff.
So I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but labor is one of the biggest challenges. Beats the drum. Labor cost, labor quality, labor availability, etc. And the tried and true kind of stump speech that people want to roll out is prefabrication. It's like when people joke about nuclear energy, it's like, oh, it's always 10 years away. Oh, this is the bump that prefabrication's all of a sudden going to hit mainstream. Sears Catalog has been doing prefabrication since long before you or I were born.
Right.
So I feel like to a certain extent, the industry looks at this and goes, fool me thrice, shame on you. Like I've heard this siren song before.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, what goes on? And so with that as a backstop, I believe that the core reason the solution has not stuck is that nobody's actually gotten into the weeds to digitize prefabrication, to digitize construction. And so by that, what I mean is if prefab is just a job site with a roof over its head, there's only so much benefit you're going to get. Yes, your workers can have their tool carts closer to them and you can, have, fans and you can make it a little bit better, but it needs to get a lot better. And in order for it to get a lot better, it needs to look like a Tesla or a Rivian factory.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too, we were talking about this last week, Garrett. The people love customization. Like nobody wants to be given 3 floor plans and 2 color options and 1 trim package. Like that's just not gonna There's only so many buyers for that, and so I think that's probably been a hang up, at least from the consumer's perspective, with this tired bit about prefab.
It offends our inner American. I don't want to have a house that looks like the person next door. Like, damn it, no. This is how we do it. And so, if you as an outlier, as a technology, cannot meet what the customer wants, then it's not going to sell. It's basics.
Yeah.
So, our belief is that these two lines of effort converge because this is what technology does really well. Computers can take immense calculations and complexity and boil it down into the simple. And if you could boil it down into the simple, now you can tap into industrial automation and start to manufacture more like a Ford Model T. Like the Model T was what it was because it was repeatable. Now we just have to connect the worlds with this custom design into a repeatable manufacturing process. And so our core DNA as a business, we're a technology company. We live in the world of manufacturing robotics as well as the software that feeds that. And so what this allows for is now you can start to connect a dotted line to how could we be building hundreds of thousands more units in a factory offsite. At a Toyota facility, they'll drive a Camry off the line about every 57 seconds. That's what housing needs. Now, not necessarily 57 seconds, but that type of mindset of we need to be able to produce it. Now, to your point about housing, it has to be custom. And so this gets into the way in which we believe the future of construction is achieved is through 2-dimensional panels. So when most people think of prefabrication, they think of the double wide, trailer park home that's getting shipped down the highway.
Right.
That is a volumetric 3D approach. Our approach is a much more cutting edge 2-dimensional approach, which says, hey, when you have a bunch of 2-dimensional panels, you can assemble those into a very uniquely complex structure. The analogy I use is if you send our software a picture of the Death Star, it will tell you exactly how many black and gray Lego bricks you need to build. And then you can take those standard blocks and all of a sudden build this complex structure because the next thing that comes off your line could be a Barbie palace, it could be a Jeep truck. It doesn't matter because the building blocks have been standardized.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's like you're making the individual Lego pieces versus the entire structure, and so you have modularity in that favors you by going about it with that sort of philosophy. Can you just take us through high level the 3 phases? So it sounds like there's sort of a digitization phase, a construction phase, and then an installation phase. How do you guys create? So first of all, manufacture and then build the houses that you build.
Yeah. So, we simplified to 3, but essentially in order to tackle this nut, you got to track 4. There's actually 4 things. So there's the design, the make, the ship, and then the install. So shipping kind of gets lost because it's not that much
It
fun, but
doesn't
it's
sit
an
on the
important
website.
component to it.
Yeah, no one cares.
So yeah, that's a you problem. So when it gets down to design, you've got to be able to work with whatever the architect wants. So that architect basically says, hey, I know this local area. I know the building codes. This is what I want the home to look like. So then we take that design, that file. It could be ADU, single family, multifamily, it could be an apartment building. If you can build it on a light timber, it works just fine through the technology. Sends the file to our software. The software says, okay, you want this, I don't know, two-story ranch style, or two-story coastal style house. It's got all these little features. Then the software just churns and burns and says, boom. All right, then it sends out these files to the factory where it gets made. And so then you've got a linear assembly line where all these 2D panels are getting built. And I'll pause real quick here to talk about customization, because customization is a bit of a misnomer. When people think custom, they oftentimes are thinking two different axes. Fit and finish, so I want to change my paint, my flooring, my cabinets, all that kind of stuff. Or they want to think architectural flexibility. I want this master bedroom to be bigger, etc. But the reality is, and the dirty little secret to what makes our process so successful, is that construction is built off of standard building blocks. In other words, how many times have you ever heard somebody call up Home Depot asking for a 2x5 or 13 gauge Romex or a circular, stud? Like, no, we have all these building blocks built. I buy my sheetrock in 4x8 sheets. I buy my studs. So when you take all of those rules, construction's actually not that custom.
It's not a completely blank canvas. In other words, there are some underpinning things here that we do need to follow and stick with.
And now it's just a matter of rearranging those. So rearrange them into a really beautiful coastal home, rearrange them into affordable housing. The wall that you might build for a backyard ADU is damn near the exact same wall that you're going to put into an apartment building.
Of course.
The rules are the same. Okay, maybe it's 16 inches on center versus 12 versus 24, but there's a lot of standardization already baked into construction that gives us this running start. So I have to caveat saying customization is actually more at the end effect rather than the building process.
Understood. It's a really good point.
So you make this custom home in a series of 2D panels. Now you can almost condensely stack them. So we ship vertically. So you imagine lining these all up in our special containers and trucks. So now you've got maybe one truck going down the highway and it's got an entire house just stacked together, all in the same container. Get to the job site, and now all of a sudden cranes picking, placing, and then pretty soon, 24 hours, that house is up and running. And so this is the type of capability that can exist when you use digital technology, because in order for that to work, your tolerances have to be tight. You got to be, down to a millimeter, because you don't have time at the job site to all of a sudden start cutting stuff apart. So it really, the design really affects the manufacturing affects installation, shipping and shipping affects installation. So they're all really connected.
How do you guys control excavation, foundations, backfill, grading, all that stuff prior to arriving on site? There's some pre-work before your guys arrive or before the trades arrive or your assembly team, whoever's involved with your actual construction process. There's work that happens before then. How do you guys control for that?
So I'm a technology guy at my core. Our business is a technology business. I actually don't want to be a builder. The way we look at this is going, hey, builders, the nail gun did not replace you. It just made the hammer a little bit less effective. We want to be the successor to the nail gun, which says, hey, here's all this technology that's going to make you, builder, faster, better, cheaper, greener, safer. And so what we're doing is we're sliding into their ecosystem and just accelerating the most labor intensive and the most time consuming, the most expensive parts. So we do not do everything to everyone. So in a house, when you go from trenching all the way to keys in hand, we want to slice out the rough trades, which says, hey, from slab to sheetrock, that's our core focus and niche right now. Because that's where we can add the most value and the most scalability while still staying as lean and efficient as possible.
So long run, your end user is actually the builder versus the homeowner, or a bit of both.
So I'd be lying if I said we don't harbor aspirations of greater vertical integration.
Yeah.
But right now we're obsessing over being an outstanding online book distributor, because eventually, if I get that right, I can slot in DVDs, although those don't matter anymore, but kids' clothes, and then all of a sudden groceries, and then pretty soon I can be doing a full end-to-end stack where I've got my own AWS servers and my aircraft and my AI devices, etc. So it's increasing verticalization, but for right now, many businesses have failed because they weren't focused enough. And so we're trying to not repeat the mistakes of our forefathers and just stay laser focused on being brilliant at a couple things.
And so with the houses that you've done so far, who's the trade partner? Who does the rough-ins? Like how do a lot of those sort of utilities and sort of very, very core central parts of a building envelope get inserted and managed with your system?
So we have our own construction team. I don't want to advertise it because that's not our goal, but we do that because it allows for us to make mistakes and really learn internal to the team. And then as we mature and the product feature sets roll out and get more evolved, then we can roll it out to customers knowing that we're tight a little bit more. So as an example, when we do our kind of cutting edge R&D projects, we do them with our internal team. And then once it's gone through validation, then we can roll that feature out to our installers and our preferred distributors because now it's ready for prime time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. This is just such a new and fresh take on a fairly, I'm not going to say old, but we have been doing things relatively the same way. Actually, here's a good piece. I pulled this from your website, right? Most residential construction is done on site by hand, the way it's been done for 120 years. Well, the tools have improved. The process of construction hasn't, with different groups responsible for different parts of the process. There is little accountability, predictability, or quality control. And so I guess your guys' goal is to sort of vertically integrate a lot of that to start, and then continue bringing in more and more and more over time. But this is an amazing first crack at it. With all that said, and sort of the path that has led us to now and what you guys have built so far, I'm very curious to get your take on the future. And so the question is this, over the next 10 years, where do you think the fairly large and complex world of residential construction is headed?
I'm trying to fight my own internal bias because obviously I'm building a business around
Be
this
biased.
future, but
it's a take. No one's going to hold you to it. It's a take.
I think what's going to happen is this problem is going to get worse and worse. And when problems become big social ones, politicians weigh in. And so I think we're going to start to see the challenge of construction get tackled by governors and the executive branch. And unfortunately, what they can do really well is wield a very large lever from a financial perspective, but they cannot innovate very well.
Right.
And so I think we're going to start to see more and more national media attention calling out this issue, like the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and 90s or whatnot, or global warming is another component to this. You're going to start to see a lot more attention, and people just say, doesn't matter, let's start trying stuff. We've got to fix this because now this is becoming a socially disrupting challenge. It's not just, oh, here's an opportunity for some venture capitalists to make money. It's, if we don't fix this, fertility rates get adjusted. The way in which people live gets adjusted. The number of miles people commute to go to work is pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere. Like it's going to start to become this bigger and bigger issue. And I think you're going to see a lot more attention towards solving it. And I fundamentally believe that the only way to solve this problem in the next 10 years is a radical transformation of the technology that does it, because there's no amount of labor. I mean, if you wanted to solve this labor problem, you got to invent a time machine and go back 4 years and start training the plumbers, electricians, and carpenters to get up to speed. There's just not the raw talent there. And oh, by the way, if you want to just throw money at them and bribe them, that's only going to further add to housing costs, which are already high. So I think you're going to start to see more and more of a war chant and a drumbeat get beaten towards this has to get solved. We have to think of housing more like we think of vehicles, where we can turn on and on a faucet and we can build more faster. And then when we do that, we need to think about the type of product that we're building, because the built environment accounts for 50% of global carbon emissions. So there's a custodianship of the housing industry that has to get taken into account. And if you build homes well, they can be zero energy. If you don't build them well, they can be terrible, terrible polluters because of how much energy they require.
Yeah. I think you're probably right, particularly about the messaging around this, as this issue becomes more acute and more felt by, already the lower class, but then it will be the lower middle class, and then it will be the middle class, and then all of a sudden it's basically the majority of North Americans are upset about this. the political system will have no choice but to step in. And I think your comment about they're good with large levels, really bad with the minutia and sort of the detail required to innovate. I think we all know that. So I could totally see them making moves on this and what exactly that looks like, whether it's subsidies or they're giving out grants to innovators like you. I could totally see that happening. I think you're probably uniquely positioned to take advantage of it. On the labor front, you're talking about if we wanted to solve this, we had to go back 4 years or whatever and get them trained then. We had a guest on a few months ago, earlier this year, and she was actually an immigration consultant. I wanted to talk to someone about another big trends thing. And so one of the big takeaways that I had from that, because I was like, hey, what are we going to do here? I don't know that there's another generation coming. I don't know that there's like some website where all the good applicants are actually applying for jobs and like we just don't know about it. Like it feels like we kind of just need to play the cards we're dealt here to some degree. What do you think we should do and what can you tell us about that? And so what she said about Canada, which is really interesting, and I don't think this issue is quite as bad in the States because your birth rate's higher and your population is bigger. But here in Canada, our population growth is going to stall out at the end of 2030, which is 8 years away. We literally will just sort of stay at 39 million people. We're not going to add to it. And that's going to have huge trickle-down effects for our economy. And basically her take on it as an immigration person was we're going to go heavy into immigration here in Canada. To start to solve that. But just to give you some perspective on the scale of some of these issues, this is not small potatoes. These are large forces that we are here as entrepreneurs, as business people, kind of navigating our way around, trying to understand and trying to make the right moves within. With that said, there'd be a lot of contractors listening to this who are more on the traditional side. They're not Agorus. They're not this techie, but they're nowhere near Chuck in the truck. These are very intelligent, highly capable, super smart contractors who are moving the needle in this direction with you. What should they do to stay ahead of this curve? Any practical advice for a builder today listening to this?
I think that the biggest way to stay out in front starts up front with the plans. For all the fancy robots and everything else, getting good quality plans, getting architects and structural engineers to communicate well, getting good digital plans that are not getting transcribed, that are accurate, that's one of the easiest, lowest hanging fruits to set a job site up for success. Is, I use the analogy, you can either, plan for a day and build in 6 months, or, plan for 6 months and build in a day. Now, I'm obviously it's a little hyperbolic, but the idea is it's not a lot of fun and it seems counterintuitive, but the best way to drive efficiencies in a build is actually planning and a lot of pre-coordination, et cetera. And you don't see that till down the road, but that can be done with relatively low technology. And even in getting up front, I think some of the greatest technological advancements we're going to start to see in construction are on the software side. So it's your Revits, your Bluebeams, your software and planning tools that are sitting up front. And I think that's where they'll be able to interface with the technology the soonest.
It's an upstream solution versus a downstream solution. That's where attention and focus should go. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's not fun. Nobody wants to plan. I don't like planning. I'd rather just go out to the job site and figure it out. And I have to resist that urge because every time I do it, I'm like, oh gosh, if I had just spent, it's measure twice, cut once. I don't want to measure the second time. Yeah, it's good enough on the first time. And then I go to make a bad cut and I'm like, dang it. I broke my own rule. I know better.
It's so good. We could spend the next 2 hours just picking your brain on how these robots work and how the plant is organized. But I'm going to actually tell listeners, go check out Garrett's site. We will link it in the description of this show. They have a beautiful, beautiful website. Your web designer did a really nice job on that. You guys can learn all about their process, their mission, their vision. I actually want to shift gears here and pick Garrett's brain on some leadership stuff. And I hope you guys are down for the ride. Let's go back to the SEAL stuff for a second because... Okay, so I just read this book. I didn't just read it. I read it a couple years ago, but I reread it and actually put it on our contractors reading list episode, which, by the way, if you haven't listened to that, go check it out. Came out a couple weeks back. It's called Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging by Sebastian Junger. You've read it? Yeah. Okay. So what that book really put into very clear perspective for me, they're talking about the veteran's journey coming home from deployment. They're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and reintegrating into society. And there's things that this is a comment about the military, but it's more so a comment about leadership and teams and closeness. What I learned from that book is that what a lot of veterans struggle with upon arriving home to their family who loves them and misses them, and their society and their sports teams and everything, yes, there's some level of shell shock, and they may have seen things or done things or been a part of things that really scared them, and they have to live with that and process through that. That's certainly a part of it. There's another huge part of it that we're learning about, which is there's a, and I'm going to botch it, so please refine this, because I'm not doing a good job describing it, but there's a level of, they actually miss the level of closeness and that feeling of being a part of something really important, that's doing something that matters, that's structured, that's organized. And so they actually feel lonely in their own home, because what they felt in battle, on deployment, was a plugging into a part of their brain, a deep part of the psychology that we just don't have in the modern world. And so when they come home, there's this bizarre paradox of you're with your loved ones again, and yet you kind of miss that grind, that journey. So I'm being a little long-winded here, but I just want to set that up. And then again, you look at the fragmented nature of construction. It's very transactional at times. People will leave their job for literally $1 an hour more sometimes. What did the Navy SEALs teach you about fostering cohesive teams, closeness, bondedness, and what can we take from that experience and hopefully inject into our construction and trades businesses?
There's a lot. There's a lot to unpack there. I would say in multiple levels. One of the things that the teams have the luxury of that is somewhat tough to translate to construction is the idea of selection and the idea of being able to choose. And so I think sometimes what some of your listeners experience is we develop a pack because we know and trust those subcontractors that we work with over and over. And that shared experience that, hey, we've been through it together, we've had tough times and we've come out stronger for it. That sets the foundation for good teamwork. Because construction tends to be so transactional and so ad hoc, sometimes it's very, very difficult for a builder or a contractor to create that family because it's, hey, so-and-so is not there. Let me use the person down the road. And so I think one of the biggest challenges I've felt going from that world, coming home from deployment to the construction world, so to speak, is that lack of collective vision and teamwork. It just doesn't exist. And so when you go around looking for it, people are like, what's wrong with you? That's not how we roll. But here's the thing, and this taps into kind of the inner psychology of what you brought up in Tribe. All of us want to belong. All of us deep down, and I shouldn't say all of us, but the vast majority of us want to belong. We want to be a part of a family, of a tribe, of something bigger than ourselves. And so I guess my encouragement would be that can be taught. Just because that subtrade, that contractor, that partner, that whatever has not experienced it before and they don't think it's value, when people start to see it, it becomes magnetic and then they want to become a part of your team. And that can go all the way into hiring W-2'd employees, all the way to building an effective job site with the right superintendents and project managers, et cetera. Culture does one of two things. It serves as a tremendous magnet for like-minded individuals. It also serves to reject antibodies that don't fit in with everybody else. And so when you bring somebody into that culture that is selfish, that is, egotistical and lacks humility, et cetera, when you've got enough cultural inertia, it just kind of rejects that person. Like, you don't belong in this tribe. Those aren't our values. Go. And so I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is it's tough to build. Don't get me wrong. It's difficult. But if you can build it, it lasts. And it just makes going to work that much better because you've got a wonderful group of teammates that are like-minded in their vision and their purpose and their cultural values. And then it just makes life a lot easier and more enjoyable.
So it's perfect. Nailed it. how can it be taught? Is it going back to some of this like mission-based leadership? Like, is that the vision you're trying to cast for the team? Hey, this is what we're doing here, and this is the role you play into it. Like, how do we communicate that to our W-2s, to our trade partners, to all stakeholders involved in our businesses? I'm not saying it's ever going to feel like we've just come out of buds trading, but are there some slivers some kernels we can pull from?
I think the question of can it be taught is actually the wrong one, because I think it's almost impossible to teach, but it can be modeled and it can be learned. And so in that context, it starts with the biggest thing. There's an old adage, like the best way to fix your culture is to fix your people or change your people. And so a lot of this centers around the hiring and screening and selection process. And don't get me wrong, I do this all the time, so I'm completely guilty of it. But it's like, it's much easier to hire the guy that's $1 an hour cheaper when you know he's going to be a pain to work with, and he's going to give you gray hairs, and he's going to be belligerent. And so when you are massively selective about your partners and your employees, you're pre-screening and filtering that out, so you don't have to undo those bad habits, and then you're shaping them into the likeness and image and culture of what you're trying to create. And then it makes it that much easier to graft new employees and teammates in.
So okay, perfect. With that said, I love this focus on selection because it's upstream of so many other things. We can work on training systems. We can work on an onboarding program. We can work on ongoing coaching, blah, blah, blah. And we do. And I'm not discounting that, but it's been my experience that that's maybe like 20% of the battle, when the 80% is just like who you're working with in the first place. So what do you really like? CEO of Agorus, I'm sure you are still involved with some of the personnel decisions that you guys make. What is it that you really look for, where you're like, these are traits that I absolutely love? This is a two-part question. At the same time, what are big like deal breakers for you? When you kind of sniff something out, do you sense that someone has something, you're like, ooh, you know what? Looks good on paper, but we can't have this. So what's the good? What do you really look for? And what are you attracted to, and what works within Agorus? And then the opposite, what really doesn't?
So my number one trait that I look for is self-awareness. Because if you have self-awareness, oftentimes humility is the offspring of that. And now we have a framework upon which we can grow together. I am not perfect. In fact, I'm highly imperfect and very, very flawed. And if you come into this relationship either unable or unwilling to recognize that you are flawed, now we have no stretch in the rubber band to try and grow together and overcome the inevitable dumpster fires that life is going to throw at us. So if you do not have that self-awareness, how am I ever going to coach you? How am I ever going to teach you? How are we ever going to work through this together? And I believe, humility and teamwork and all those are other great attributes. But generally, if you get self-awareness right, in my perspective and opinion, the others tend to follow. Mm-hmm. So the flip side to that, which is one of the easier things to try and root out, is I have less than zero patience for egos or lack of humility. Like, period.
How come?
I'm a little jaded here, but from my prior line of work, egos will get you killed. And if you do not have the ability to check your ego at the door, somebody's going to die. That might be me. That might be one of the guys in the platoon or the troop. That is a recipe for disaster, when you cannot hold yourself, your plan, your idea, your whatever at arm's length and go, hey, this is not about me. This is about mission success. Inevitably, nothing but collateral damage and a wake of bodies, metaphorical or literal, will follow behind that person. And let's just face it, it's just not fun to work around people that have high egos. Like, life is too short to take yourself that seriously. And so I don't care how talented you are. That is my number one. Like, I cannot put up with it, because it is just so cancerous.
That is just such gold right there. I think there's something, I mean, you can define ego in so many different ways. And I'm also not one of these people that thinks like ego is this absolutely terrible trait that you have to get rid of entirely. Like there's such a thing as healthy ego.
Yes.
You need to have something. That's what gets you out of bed in the morning. That's what gives you that swagger. That's what gives you the confidence to set big goals for yourself and have the balls to say, I think I can do this and go try. So there's a healthy amount, but when you get into the ranges where it's too much, what you described where it's like the addiction or the love or obsession of one's own ideas and the inability to be objective about it and say when critiqued or when, girded against reality and forced to go through the actual meat grinder that is the mission, when you're actually testing this thing against real forces and it collapses in certain areas, people with huge egos still defend it. They're like, no, this is the right thing because I'm the one that came up with it. And you're like, bro, here it is in reality not working. Like, I don't know what ground you feel you have to stand on, but the way you described it where it's like, it's people are connected or in love with like the things that they put forward versus looking at it from like a perspective of truth and what actually works, what's functional. So interesting.
Yeah. And I think when I say ego, what it boils down to is what is your highest allegiance? Is it to the company, to the team, and to the mission? Or is it to yourself and your own career, your own paycheck, your own notoriety and fame? And those two interact. And sometimes it's a little insidious and you can't necessarily tell. But if at the end of the day, I think you're going to put your interests above the mission, then I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, then it's really hard to build teamwork and camaraderie.
That's probably the most basic ingredient you need, isn't it? I talked to Paul, one of our construction coaches, and he's really bummed he's not here, by the way. He sent me I was like, I'm going to talk to this Garrett guy. What would you ask him? He sent me a big block of things. One of the things that he wanted to pick your brain on, I think there's maybe some overlap a little bit, but it's a slightly different question, is like, what traits lead to success in a SEALs environment, in a military environment, and specifically, which ones parlay really well to entrepreneurs? I guess what I'm asking is like, can you describe the profile of a high performer, both in SEALs and in business? What do they have in common?
I think they have a ton in common. And this is actually one of my gripes is I think people sometimes tend to put military, and even people in the military put themselves in like, this skill set's not going to transfer, or I'll never make it as a civilian because, it's a different world. Not really. I mean, yes, there are differences, but at the end of the day, there's a lot more overlap than I think most people think. So I would say one of the very first ones is calm under pressure. There's a saying in the SEALs, calm breeds calm. Yeah, life is crazy. I get it. But it's going to be fine. And if you are calm, then your teammates and your partners and your spouse and your kids, and it becomes contagious. And so that is one of those things that I think is especially relevant for entrepreneurs, because by definition, if you're an entrepreneur, you're just throwing yourself into a series of dumpster fires. It's never going to be calm. You're not getting a 9 to 5 where it's a steady banking job where it's the same over and over, rinse, lather, repeat. By definition, every day is chaos. So being able to be calm under pressure, and there's a phrase in the SEAL ethos, my ability to control my actions and my emotions regardless of circumstance is what sets me apart from other men. So that's essentially calm. Hey, the feelings I'm feeling, we all have them. Can I subordinate them to doing the right thing and my actions, even though they're telling me to panic, to scream, to yell, to do whatever? So I would say that's the first thing. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just listening along, enjoying it. The calm under a pressure is one. What would be another? I'll circle back to some of these in a sec. So that's number one. What's maybe number two?
I think the ability to problem solve. So one of the things that I'm so proud of being a team guy, a SEAL, and what I'm so amazed by the people that groomed me and taught me, is the ability to solve problems no matter what. There's an innate I don't care what the issue is. I'm going to find a solution. Yeah, top employee just left. Customer just left. Had a safety accident. Whatever it is, it's just like, it kind of goes back to the calm, but it's a new problem. I'm going to prioritize, I'm going to problem solve, and then I'm going to go ahead and execute a solution. And it's that never-ending confidence that, whatever the issue is, good.
I'm going to find a solution, and I'm going to press forward.
Those
and
two
the ability
really.
to.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it is a skill that has to get learned, but it's increasingly important for an entrepreneur because there's no rule book. We're building the airplane mid-flight, so you got to be able to solve problems.
I was going to say that those two really dovetail quite nicely. Like the calm one comes first, because without that, the capacity to even entertain solving a problem is basically out the window. So let's give us a third, just because it's a nice round number, and this is such gold. We've got calm under pressure, problem solving. What's a third?
I would say the last one is professionalism, and it goes a little bit back to this conversation we were having earlier. But to me, the mark of a professional is somebody that's self-aware, and that self-awareness leads to self-improvement, and that self-improvement leads to self-discipline. And so, if you know where you are strong and weak, then you can either choose to mitigate and improve your weaknesses or double down on your strengths. And then through discipline, you can routinely leverage and extrapolate on those. But if you don't know even where you're a starting place, or you're not willing to have your loved ones and people around you kind of point out your blind spots, then you're just kind of meandering because you don't know what you're good at, you don't know what you're bad at. And so one of the big things I always say is it's so much more effective to double down and lead from your strengths than it is trying to lead constantly worrying about all your weaknesses. We've all got them, but those are not great points of leverage. It's like, you're a screwdriver. Well, you're trying to pound in nails. That's not what you're designed to do. Forget the nails, focus on the screws.
Yeah, that's like an old, Gary Vaynerchuk? He's a pretty popular guy. Gary Vaynerchuk, he's a big social media influencer guy. He always says this about business. He's kind of a modern day business guru. He's like, triple down on your strengths and essentially don't worry about the weaknesses. Like, find other people to look after those. I don't think he's saying ignore your flaws completely. Someone might take that too literally, but
you
in the context of,
if you're an a-hole.
Right. In the context of business, if you're trying to create leverage for yourself, you're probably better off looking at what you're exceptionally good at and just spending most of your time there. We're running out of time here. I got maybe a couple questions left. How about a fun one? You're an ex-football player. Who's going to win the Super Bowl this year? You got to pick.
There are certain people where it's really foolish to bet against them. Forget the team, forget the dynamics, forget everything else. Betting against Tom Brady is not a great idea in general, just as like from a statistical perspective. So I don't know.
Bucks are looking
if
good.
I had to say, I honestly I think the Bills or the Buccaneers have to be on the very, very short list because of who's leading the helm for both of them.
Spoken like a true SEAL. You know who's calm under pressure? Tom frickin' Brady, man. That guy, 2-minute drill is like no one sports has ever seen. Okay, this has been unbelievable. I could go another hour, maybe 2, but we don't have time. Because people will want to kind of check you out, learn a little more. There's questions we didn't have time to dig into. If people want to know more about you, Agorus, and the very, very cool things you guys are up to, where should they do that?
Easiest 2 things are to reach out and kind of check out our website. But if you want to connect with me personally, LinkedIn's the easiest place to start. We are. It takes a village to raise a startup. It takes a village to raise an entrepreneur. And so I am always looking for like-minded construction technologists that are eager and passionate to help push and move and prod and cajole this industry forward. And would love to connect, figure out how we can just stay in touch, professionally overlap, work together, all of the above. It's all about the team.
I really appreciate you making time for us. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and we'll have to have you back in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, Benji. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Contractor Evolution. If you've already subscribed to our channel, consider sharing this episode with another contractor who you think needs to hear it.